Welcome to Leading AI Agents. I'm Olivia Manchin, and my guest today is someone who has been building at the intersection of enterprise software and machine learning for over 20 years, long before AI agents were a buzzword. Eduardo Gonzalez is the CEO and co-founder of Xpress.AI, a platform that turns AI agents into real working digital workforce for enterprise teams. But to understand what he's building, you have to understand the path that got him here. Eduardo studied computer science and Japanese at the University of Pittsburgh. He moved to Japan and spent years working his way up inside a Japanese systems integrator, from programmer to manager to leading product development. He joined SkyMind, a Y Combinator startup where he served as VP of Engineering and Global CIO, running deep learning infrastructure for some of the world's largest companies. He also taught as an assistant professor at Kyoto Seika University and co-authored a book on deep learning. Eduardo has said that his whole career, from Japan Business Systems to SkyMind, was always pointed at the same goal: making AI accessible and useful so businesses could actually put it to work. That's what led him to co-found Xpress.AI. Eduardo and his co-founder, Paul Dubbs, set out to build not just another AI tool, but an operating system for AI agents, one that could be tested, trusted, version locked, and deployed like a real member of your team. Their product is now on the fifth agent framework built from years of learning what breaks and why. Their customers include financial institutions with the strictest data privacy requirements in the world, organizations that don't just want AI that's smart, they want AI that they can rely on. Eduardo isn't just theorizing about the future of agents. He's building it, bootstrapped, globally distributed, and rooted in the belief that the agents that will matter aren't the ones with the biggest models or the most hype, but they're the ones that you can test, understand, and trust with real work. Eduardo, welcome to Leading AI Agents. I'm so glad to have you here.
Yeah, what a great introduction. I think that nailed most of the things.
Amazing. So we'll cover all the in-betweens.
Mhm.
So give us like a clear picture. How did you get into AI? What was that spark that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, so I've been interested in AI for quite a while. I would say what really sparked my interest in computers in general was games, but not just any kind of games. I actually liked airplanes. So when I was a kid, I would always use the flight simulator software that my dad had on the computer because my dad actually worked as an aircraft mechanic. So, aviation was kind of a big thing. And, you know, as part of trying to get those things to work and like install the new one, I had to kind of learn how computers worked, like the DOS command lines and like Windows 3.1 and all these kind of things back in the day. And yeah, but then eventually, I was like a Nintendo kid, so I had a Super NES and things like that, and I really got into video games and really enjoyed that. And because my generation, like games really kind of equaled Japan, I also got very interested in Japan from that age, essentially. So if I wanted to make video games, I had to go to Japan to do it, was my thinking back in the day. And yeah, so those kind of were my two passions. And one of the most interesting things for me was like AI in video games. I always thought that was maybe the most interesting part of it because, like when you're fighting enemies and in a video game and they hide behind things instead of just going beeline straight to you all the time. That was a interesting thing to me. I was like, oh wow, these things are like, kind of doing some thoughts here. This is pretty interesting. And also as a person who, was diagnosed with ADHD as a kid, I was always fascinated by the brain itself, right? Like what makes my brain different than everybody else's. So yeah, and I find like AI is kind of an interesting place where you can kind of dive, maybe not necessarily in the brain itself because it's such a different system than the actual brain, but there's an intelligence that is very primitive but very like real and useful in a video game, for example. And yeah, like what just seeing and interacting and toying with what makes those two things tick and how they compare with the actual brain was very fascinating to me from a long time. So when I did do programming in university, there was a few ML courses, and I definitely took that because I've always been interested in it.
Wow, and what a full circle moment, right? To
Yeah.
have you here based in Japan now and doing all of this work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a quite a journey, I would say. Yeah.
And so, speaking of the mind and
Mhm.
personalities, you know, when people create agents, they tend to give them names, personalities. Do you think that those are essential for the way that we interact with agents?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's interesting. So I think it is essential for LLMs, and therefore, yes, it is kind of essential for agents, but it's not necessarily essential in general. So what I mean by this is a large language model is trying to kind of like emulate a person, or like, it's trying to be something. So one interesting thing is ChatGPT acts the way it is, not just because it's training data, but also because its name is very scientific, like it's GPT. It's not Claude or, like Harry or Bob, Like if you said in the system prompt, your name is Bob, it would act differently, even though it's the exact same model. So because of that, like if you give your LLM a name of a famous person, it's going to try and emulate things that that famous person would say. And so in a similar reasoning, right, if you give it a real name, you'll get something that becomes a more natural, maybe distinct output than if you gave it a robot name like PDP-12 or something like that, And I've actually tried both. In Xpress.AI, like before, we actually had very Star Wars droid-like names, like a DEV-10 or something like that for a software developer bot, or FAF82, things like that. And it doesn't not work, but I did find that it would try to, take that name a little too literally sometimes and be a little robotic in its responses or whatever. And I know that it's capable of not being robotic. It didn't need to pretend. So eventually I got rid of that and then went with more natural sounding names, like regular human names. And then another thing that I discovered is that when you have names of your agents with like robotic like letters and numbers, it's actually really hard to remember. Like it's much easier to remember a name, right? Like even if it's a kind of a weird name. Like so I have like Blaine or Flynn in my team. These are agents. And I find it much easier to remember them. I couldn't even like just now remember exactly what the name of that agent was. I think it was actually HAF82. Like it takes a while. So yeah, there's also the human aspect of it is that we are kind of, it's easier for us to remember things when we have like a human face and a human like name that we're used to seeing. So in that sense, it is totally essential, but like maybe not for the reasons you might have expected.
That is so fascinating. Oh my gosh. And so, talk a little bit more about Express AI and how you're using agents, I think personally and also in your organization and the solution. So, maybe like the three parts.
Yeah, so in Express AI, we are not a like a one person company, but I try to, well, we have a lot more agents than we have people. So I have an entire team of agents that are doing everything for me, from the project management to like our marketing, our website development, and looking at our DevOps and things like that. So the idea is I have every member of our team is super accelerated by the agents that they have. And I think there's some software developers who've really embraced this, where they're, spending their time working on the harness, right? Trying to create the ultimate system for developing code. And I kind of feel like Express AI is that, but for everything, not just for the code part. So, I have like a CFO agent, which really, reminds me about deadlines, like stuff I didn't really know about for compliance things, like genuinely, it would just kind of ring up. It's like, hey, we got to renew our like registered agent thing, and that costs X amount of money. But, like because it had some information, it knew like we could actually save like $50 by changing our registered agent to something else, right? And stuff like that. So, just like how there are some like software developers who are creating this kind of harness that has sub agents and I would say like workflows that are built in to kind of create the ideas. They want to not just vibe code. They want to do something where it's like they want to take their expertise and encode it into a system that produces high quality code, mostly automatically. And, the thinking is it's like the difference between a bicycle and a motorcycle, right? Like with a bicycle, you can only go so fast. Your body is just one. But with a motorcycle, you can put a bigger and bigger engine in it and get to from point A to point B much faster. And AI is like that, right? Like if a computer is a bicycle for the mind, a computer with AI is, like an automobile in a sense. So yeah, in Express AI, we have procedures and schedules, crons, just like you would have in something like OpenClaw. And you can like build a system that helps you run things. And then I use it personally to help run Express AI nice and smoothly and give all my employees like the AIs that they can use to help themselves as well.
Wow.
And
And you guys were already an AI company, so maybe you didn't need to try to convince people to become AI pilled. But what
Mhm.
would you say to a CEO that wants to have their organization be run like with AI, just like yours,
Mhm.
but they are feeling maybe resistance or reluctance, maybe from their team or for themselves?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a thing, right? There's some kind of like high profile AI first, I guess memos or something like that that leaked and then became a whole thing on the internet. But yeah, so AI first is I have this belief, right? Because of course I do it. I'm an AI CEO kind of thing, right? But there's only going to be AI first companies essentially because they will be able to execute more and more than ones that don't. So it's kind of important to make this transition. Now, of course, there's going to be resistance from employees, and I think the main thing is they resist for a couple of things. One is a fear that they're going to lose their job, and I don't really understand that. Or as in, I understand the fear, right? Like I totally get it. But as a business owner, part of the value of your business is the, size of the team that you have and things like that. So you kind of don't want to get rid of people. And I always find AI is more multiplicative than like purely additive. And what I mean by that is, sure, there might be one day this like single CEO billion-dollar company that me and also Sam Altman was talking about, and that will happen. But the person, that CEO, is really good, right? Like not anybody can just pick up a bunch of agents and become a billion-dollar company by themselves. And I view all of my employees as, they add more, they bring more to this equation. They give us a bigger number to then multiply with AI. So I always value all of them and I will keep as many as I can, essentially. So there's no fear in an AI first mindset of kind of replacing your employees with AI. That's a terrible, terrible idea. But you can totally multiply your output of your employees, make them a lot more productive, and just make the business healthier with AI. And I think almost every CEO agrees that you kind of don't want to overdo it when it comes to headcount, but you do want to have a healthy headcount. These people are actually delegating tasks for you and they become responsible for things, they bring in new ideas. So it's definitely something where you want to have more headcount, but you don't want to have too much. But with AI, there's no real problems with having too much AI. I mean, of course, there's some token limitations or whatever where it might cost too much, but yeah, then just turn them off. There's literally no repercussions from that versus when you have to fire a person. That is a very big decision that you just can't take like lightly due to regulations and all these things. So for a CEO that's getting resistance from the team, I think the main thing is they need to educate them, right? Like essentially, I'm not sure about the best metaphor for this, right? But if you have someone who's ridden horses all their life and you show them a car, of course, they might need to learn how to drive that car, but they will get a much more done by being able to drive the car than to do everything with a horse. And so you got to do that. And I think you can always start with simple things. So you can tell them, here's a tool. Let's, start by doing something that you as a CEO kind of notice that it would be good to improve. So for example, let's say you have a paralegal kind of person in your team who helps you review contracts, and you are constantly waiting for this person, essentially, which is the way it usually is because the legal person just has so many contracts to review, and they're all so bad and filled with foot guns that they really need to, protect the company from. And if they're doing their job right, they're going to take time. But for example, like here in Japan, there's anti what they call the anti-social clauses or anti-social clauses, which essentially prevent yakuza from being able to do business. Kind of says, if you're a yakuza, we don't want to do business with you, or if you're associated with yakuza, we don't want to do business with you, etc. And it's kind of an important thing to have because more and more things have this anti-social clause, and the second they find out, or if you happen to accidentally be associated with the yakuza, you lose access to almost everything. So it's of course important to add this clause into contracts. And so you could tell this guy or girl, just make an AI which will find what you're looking for, right? Like take what you do, what do you control F? Where are you searching for? What kind of words do you expect to be in the thing? And then just tell the AI to do this for you. And then make a little pipeline where if you drop a folder in here or send an email to the agent, it will give you that response. And then let's see if that speeds you up a little bit. And once you're comfortable with that, then let's go and tackle the next one, whatever you think is more important. And just to help you speed up things. And, from the person's perspective, is like, oh, wow, I could get less, like I have to spend less time on the most boring stuff. That's a good thing. So as long as you can kind of do this for your team or, get your team on board to do this for themselves, I think you can also get everybody on board with just reducing the grunt work that they have with AI, which is the main thing. I think grunt work in general is termed that and felt like that by everybody because it feels like it is more work that than what you could bring to the company, right? Like you could spend your energy doing more for the company, but you're stuck doing grunt work. So that's the first thing that AI should be tasked with doing.
Definitely. And I'm sure they'll feel the mental load too kind of be removed once that grunt work is kind of out of their plate, and they can maybe
Yeah.
start to be more creative and start to then lead those agents. And
Yeah.
I think there's something important you're saying. People need to see the magic in AI. They need to see what is possible in their work. Because like you're saying, if you've only, ridden horses and somebody hands you a car keys and they're like, here, drive this. And they're like, what? I don't know what you're saying,
Yeah.
but if you're like, wow, look, I'm going to show you this thing, that's when it kind of get activated in them.
Yeah, exactly. Like you think it's so different to drive a car versus use a horse for transportation. And I think it's kind of, I mean, it's not a perfect analogy because, the agents are kind of doing work for you. But, like I think a lot of managers also go through this period where when they're first getting into management and leading a team, they do too much work for themselves and they really should be delegating. So I think in general, like having agents and just learning to delegate to agents it's very similar to delegating to humans and learning to delegate to humans, with the caveat that, like these agents are, intelligent in a different way than a human would be. So, they kind of more emulate intelligence than are actually intelligence, right? And what that means is that, horse emoji can get them to go completely crazy, right? And, like they can answer PhD level questions about science and math, but then when asked the question of whether I should walk to the car wash to wash my car or drive my car to the car wash to wash a car, they'll say, well, if the car wash is very close by, you can totally walk to the car wash, right? It makes no sense because and then what happens with the car, right? So
Totally.
yeah, like there's definitely a different kind of delegation style here, but yeah, if you have the right mindset and you take it like, one step at a time, focus mainly on this grunt work thing so that you can use your creativity more effectively for the company. I think that's the right perspective to take on things and is going to be the way we really feel about computers in general in the near future, where we look at software today and be like, man, it was just so passive. You signed up for a CRM and that was it. Like if you didn't do anything, it would literally do nothing, right? And it will feel so weird and foreign to people in the future.
And so, speaking of just what you're saying, where it seems like every employee is going to be leading an agent. So, even people who aren't used to leading people now, right? Like managers who are kind of reluctant to lead, but they're like, no, everyone's going to be leading. What are those skills that are required for everyone, since everyone's going to be a leader at this point?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's definitely like there's a two parts of management, I think, right? Which is there is the learning to delegate part, right? And kind of organize for a group of people. But then also a manager is also expected to deal with the human aspects of like managing a team. So, like helping them grow and, giving them a safe emotional space to really thrive, which is, I think, the majority. There are some places where it's like, no, you get cutthroat or you get cut out or something like that, right? But there's kind of these two things. With agents, you don't necessarily need to think about their future, right? Like they have really no will in that sense, like you can and what I mean is, if you take a person and say, and sit them down in front of a computer and it's like, well, this is your computer, you can do whatever you want with it, they'll eventually go and do something, right? Like they won't just sit there and do nothing, but an agent won't necessarily go and do anything if you didn't tell it to do anything. And that's not just a matter of it was trained to do that per se. It's just that the training process is just giving it all the data. And so it doesn't have this singular kind of experience that we have. And so therefore, maybe if you took a base model that isn't fine-tuned on anything in particular, it might do random things here and there, but it wouldn't make anything cohesive. So when you are managing agents, you don't need to worry about that personal aspect other than maybe it's better to not degrade your agents when you're talking to them, mainly because, if you tell them they're stupid, they're going to act stupid, just like if you, just like when you give them a name, right? If you give them a robotic name, they're going to pretend to be robotic. If you give them a good name, they pretend to be good. So there is this idea of positive reinforcement will be more effective when you're dealing with agents, but that's pretty much all you need to do when it comes to there. Then it's really just a matter of that productivity part, like how do you create SOPs for your agents? So, when you're being a manager and a good manager, you want to kind of create these standard operating procedures for people. And when you're a new person doing a job for the first time, if you come to it and you have absolutely no, foundation to work from, it's a very uncomfortable thing, right? You're like, you obviously do not know exactly what you need to do, right? And it's a brand new role. So you fear that you're going to make a bunch of mistakes trying to do things. But if you come to a role and you have this foundation of here are the SOPs of how we do business here, you immediately understand, okay, this is the kind of stuff that I'm going to do, and all the steps that I need to do are right here. And yeah, and then the only fear goes, well, what happens if I need to do something and the SOP doesn't cover it? What should I do then? And in general, the best way to do that is, SOPs are it's never your fault as a subordinate if a mistake happens and you followed the SOP. That just means we need to update the SOP. So when something happens, some mistake, we come to a meeting, we figure out what part of the SOP was wrong, and then fix the SOP and then go with that. And the person also who is doing it becomes one of the main, it doesn't just become this person who receives all these SOPs, also become one of the authors of the SOPs. And then that helps them, learn how to manage, and then they become a manager, and the circle of life continues in that sense. So a very similar thing needs to happen with your agents, and I think that's a great way to do it, mainly because with an SOP, it kind of removes unnecessary creativity that an agent might bring in, right? And for an agent, creativity is kind of like entropy, right? It's just like random stuff they do. So by putting some guardrails, you get a lot more consistent results from the agent. And then you just need to make sure that you're on top and verifying that the agent is successful at doing these procedures. And when it is not, you get together with the agent and help the agent, either ask the agent to fix the procedure so that it doesn't happen next time, or just fix the procedure yourself if it's pretty simple. And yeah, I think that's just a valuable skill to have for business in general. And it's probably the best way to get a bunch of, I don't know, like a lot of productivity from your agents in a short amount of time.
I think that's a great analogy, especially if you, especially in your role. And I have experience in creating job descriptions, hiring people, creating SOPs, and
Mhm.
that's the perfect analogy one to one with agents, 100%. And like you're saying, creating those guardrails for agents. And it's interesting how it seems like as people lead agents, it's going to magnify poor leadership. Because if
Yeah.
if you're an unorganized person, or you're confused, lack clarity, aren't creating SOPs, aren't empowering your employees, it's going to be the same with an agent. So it's interesting. You talk a lot about how agents can magnify a bad thing, and it
Mhm.
sounds like very much this is still the case.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of the problems people see with vibe coding, right? Like a lot of engineers are against AI or agents because they see vibe coding and they see the problems. And the problem, and that's just, it's just poor leadership. If you were a person and you had a 5-person team and all you said is make me a thing, right? And that was all
Right.
you told them, right? Of
That'd be
course,
terrible.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You get like a terrible mess. They have no direction. They don't know what to do. There's no procedures, so they all kind of follow these random procedures of how they do things. You're going to get a poor quality output. So if you think about when you're automating your job, you're not just dealing with software anymore, right? So you don't have to, and this was a kind of a thing that I think is interesting because back in the day before computers, whenever you had subordinates or things like that, you kind of had to learn these things, right? Like it was you had to deal with humans for every step of a company, no matter what. So it was like a fundamental skill there. And now that we have computers, the computers can they follow these rules that were ordained to them and they always follow them perfectly no matter what. And so I think a little bit of that skill became not necessary for everyday life. And it was possible to, just be like a scientist or a programmer or, other individual contributor level where you never ever had to learn any of these things and just retire from that. But it's a good skill to have in general, right? Like the idea of when you're in the age of AI and everybody has it, the people who leverage it the most are just going to be so productive that they are going to be the ones that everybody does, right? Like if there's like one, I mean, I don't think it'll ever be like that, but you can imagine maybe there's one scientist who was able to take what they do and encode it into a bunch of AIs, and now they're as productive as 100 scientists. It'd be a weird thing to hire one of those scientists that doesn't do these kind of things, right? So I think it's just become an essential skill, just like learning to use Microsoft Word, Excel, and use a computer is an essential skill too. But this time it also goes up into people management as well because it's a similar thing. So it's definitely a worthwhile skill to have, just like, any kind of productivity. There's different productivity skills, and I think there are different ways to lead your agents. But this one is you know, SOPs are kind of like a pretty surefire way of how to lead a company the best way, I think. Very few alternatives exist that aren't pure luck, I think, when you think about it. But yeah, so yeah,
Definitely, especially scaling organizations, right? Especially as an
yeah.
organization, if you're wanting to scale, that's just it. You need to create standard operating procedures. That's how you can track time, track money,
Mhm.
a lot more clarity throughout all the departments. And so, as you were saying, agents, even though they are reliable, they can be quite unreliable sometimes as well. Like you said earlier with the car wash example, I'm
Yeah.
curious. I did watch a video where you talked about how Xpress.AI navigates hallucination. So, talk a little bit
Mhm.
more about that.
Yeah, so you can think of hallucination is a necessary part of the way LLMs work. And I also like to kind of also bring it into neuroscience. There's when a part of the brain is affected, like I think is Broca's area in particular, a similar thing can happen to humans as well, where if they lose this filter in their brain, they will say kind of random things. So essentially, for a properly functioning human brain that you expect, right? They might have ideas, but they don't say everything that comes to mind, right? They're able to filter out the things that don't make sense or kind of realize that they might have an idea of something that's cool or sounds cool, but it's completely made up. And so we have another area of our brain that is like looking at that and filtering that out, right? So in our system in Express AI, we kind of have a little mini, I'd say like model of the brain in it, right? So there's not just a single LLM that is just being used as is, because I feel like that is kind of like that idea center of the brain, like the Wernicke's area, where it's coming up with different things, but then that has to be judged on whether or not that is correct. And then that judgment, is not just like, is this correct? Like it's more like, am I sure that this is correct? That kind of feeling is important for being able to communicate well. So with our setup, we kind of have the thalamus of the brain, which is the thing just ahead of your brain stem. And if you ever had an experience where you got frozen in fear, right? Like
Mm.
it's a real thing that the brain does. Essentially, something happened and the thalamus does not have enough information to know what to do. And so it
Mm.
will freeze so that it can have a little bit more time to get the information. And so similarly with our setup, we have one agent, it's not really an agent. It's more like it's trying to be this module that is taking this input right from the other parts of this model of the brain. And its job is to go, am I certain that this is the best thing to do right now? Or is there any uncertainty which I should block this call and have it reevaluate? And because it can do this kind of reevaluation loop on itself, that becomes this natural stop for a lot of hallucination. So, and that's one of the things we're explicitly kind of prompting that thalamus for, is there evidence in the rest of the context to support everything that we're saying here or not, right? And it goes for tool calls as well as, well, there's only tool calls in our setup. So when the agent responds without using a tool, that just becomes internal thought that like the voice inside of your head. It has to actually use a tool to speak, to connect itself with the rest of the world. So the thalamus can, naturally just stop any tool calls and then force it to reevaluate. But there's also the fact that the thalamus doesn't have unlimited ability to stop you from ever moving, right? Like there's a kind of cool down or something like that. So it has the ability to stop to help it think, but it can't do that forever because otherwise it can get into like a loop where it just thinks itself for the rest of time. So yeah, that's our main combat against hallucination by forcing it to kind of reevaluate and giving it the ability to just think about things more than just saying the first thing that comes out of its mouth.
That is so interesting. That just sounds exactly like leadership, right?
Mhm.
Like, when I advise CEOs and when I advise people, it's like you need to take a moment and pause and truly, think about the certainty and take a breath and all of these things. And so you're embedding that, you're programming it essentially into these agents, into the LLM.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's really interesting and an underused part of science, I think, right? Like we've been able to learn so much about the brain through like brain trauma investigations, right? Like if somebody has a trauma to the front of the brain and the prefrontal cortex and different areas, we can see what behavioral changes happen to them. And if we're trying to create an artificial intelligence, for me, I think the shortest cut is to, well, what does the brain do? We should at least be modeling that in the brain, similar to how like airplanes they have wings because we have birds that have wings. And so by creating a little model of what a bird wing does, we can have flying machines. Well, if we want to have artificial intelligence, we just do the same thing. Now, it doesn't have to be the same. An airplane is very different function in terms of how it works compared to a bird wing because birds flap their wings, but it still achieves the same goal. And I would say, there's no doubt that an airplane is flying, right? And
Totally.
so when it comes to an LLM, if it has enough model, like a good enough model of a brain, then you can say, yeah, that is intelligent, not just being lucky a lot of the time. Because, a fundamental thing to understand about LLMs is they they don't really have like state in the same way that we have state. Like memory is definitely one of the most important parts of an agent. And the way you can think of a large language model is imagine a game where you had 100 different people and they had to make a story one word after another. So the first person says the first word, and then the second person says the second word, and the third person says the third word. Essentially LLMs are playing that game and they are really, really good at that game. Like that's kind of what their training does, right? It's given the words that they heard before and nothing else. They have to come up with the best next word, but they don't have an inherent sense of identity that they're trying to maintain or anything like that. So as part of your agent, it you need to put that in there. Now, whether or not just having an identity markdown file is all you need for that, I think is up to debate. I would say it needs to be something that's actively maintained and evaluated in the agent, not just a text document, which is why we do the things we do. But yeah, like these are things that you need to do if you want to have something that you can genuinely say is artificially intelligent.
when you're talking about the models of the world and then
Mhm.
applying them also to your organization, to the AI that you're building and the
Mhm.
agents, when we think about culture, right? So you and I are both based here in Tokyo, Japan, and there's a lot of different ways of doing business, of living all of it in this culture. How is it that you're finding that either the Japanese are applying AI a little differently than maybe Americans or Europeans or people that you work all over the world?
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? Because so one thing about kind of like the I would say like default Japanese culture is this idea that things need to be perfect. And so, it's definitely a thing that when you're running a business in Japan, even if you're a Japanese company, it's not just like a foreigners versus Japanese thing. It's like there are people who will spend 90% of the budget to get 99% there, and then the other 90% of the budget to get to the 100%, right? Like, and that's a thing that happens a lot. A lot of Japanese people who've actually been in the trenches will tell you about this. And it's terrible for business, right? Because like what that means, the implication is that they will take up your 90% of your budget to get there, and then they're expecting you to go over budget, right? Almost 100% to bring it to that last mile of
Um,
100% correct.
and so
Yeah,
expensive.
yeah, exactly. And because of that is the culture that they have here, we have the society that we have, right? And so you can argue whether or not that's worth it. It's bad in certain senses, but if you've lived here and you understand how much better 7-Eleven here is than America, you kind of get that this is really ingrained into the culture, and it's just a thing that you need to work with. And it's always been a challenge for AI in Japan because of that. Like it needs to be 100% correct, and you have something that isn't 100% correct. And, humans aren't 100% correct either. But the difference is, and I think this is important, is that a human can be held responsible for a mistake, right? And a computer can never be held responsible for a decision, right? Like, what are you going to do? You unplug it? Like, it doesn't care, right? Like,
You can't use shame. You can't
yeah.
like
Yeah, like no
mhm.
one's gonna miss it when it's gone, right? Like it is just a bunch of electrons. It's some numbers on a disk, right?
Mm.
So responsibility definitely stops, right? Like you can't get an AI system to be 100%. And so when it came to software systems, essentially the idea was you get it as close as you can to 100% correct, and then make sure you have processes in place so that people can be held responsible or to either fix the issue within time and be, within the SLA, or, that they're the ones who have to answer up to these particular problems and things like that. So yeah, so when it comes to AI, it's kind of hard in that sense because it's not always perfect from the beginning. Now, the way I've been going about it is through SOPs, right? Because with a system where you have an SOP that and in particular, we have this thing called the ready agent, where ready is like reliable and or like reliable, efficient communication, like yes, right? So the idea is to take away the amount of freedom the LLM has to perform some certain task by making that into software and then only relying on the LLM for the parts of the task that require the LLM. And by doing it this way, you get something that is very much a lot like software, and it kind of is always reliable. It will do everything the same way every time because it is actually a software program that is running. And then you use the LLM for the other parts. So that's a big one. It reduces the blast radius of a problem happening by quite a bit. But you're always going to have a part where like what happens if the agent is supposed to respond in Japanese, but it responds in Chinese for whatever reason, right? Something that sometimes happens. And then you need to have, another part, right? Like another multi-agent system that reviews that and does these things. And then you build a data set of different things. So that just kind of gives you take the question of whether this is going to be reliable enough and make it into data. And I think that's an American perspective as well. Like a lot of companies like Google kind of always want the data, right? They don't really want hunches. They want people to, in every meeting, you bring the data and then you use the data to back up whatever argument you have. And I apply that to the AI agent, right? So we make data sets and we bring the agents through those data sets to kind of bring data to, like we've done this many tasks, we've seen hallucination X amount of times. It's usually not zero, maybe it is or something like that. But then you can give it a percentage, and then if you can do that, the most natural thing I think for a lot of Japanese is like, well, how do we get that percentage to zero? Well, now you have a fixed task. You have a data set and it has maybe one or two hallucinations in it. Now make it so that it has zero hallucinations in that data set. And that's a data point, right? Now you can say that that's it. And now you have the process of, well, if a customer complains about something that happens, we take that, we include it into the data set, and we run it again, right, through the entire thing. And then we just have a little contract where we have a process where we're going to help you, and we guarantee that we'll get this to not have that problem ever again. Then that makes it, something that you can actually tangibly feel and deal with in just in day-to-day business. So that's been my way of going about it.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like it's definitely very different from American culture, where maybe an American organization, depending on how strict it is, the CEO might just have people experiment or everybody just try things, innovate, be creative. Whereas here it's much more about how can we get this perfect behind the scenes before we even start experimenting it.
Yeah, exactly. I would say there's a fundamental difference in most, Japanese and versus American companies, though, of course, like military is quite different and finance is very different in America. But, when in an American company, when you're in a meeting with the CEO, you kind of say, like, CEO, I'm going to do the AI thing, right? But in a Japanese company, the CEO goes, hey, Tanaka-san, you're the guy who's going to do the AI thing, right? And so what that typically causes is that you have, Tanaka or whatever is now doesn't know anything about AI, but they are responsible for the AI thing. And so they're going to go out and see, how do they reduce their risk, right? Because they don't really want it to be about them because they don't know anything about AI typically, or maybe they had some kind of like the CEO picked them because they played with ChatGPT once, right? And now the CEO is like, okay, now you're our head of
You're
AI.
the guy,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So they look at the situation very differently, even though it seems very similar, right? Like this is a head of AI in an American company versus a Japanese company, and there's kind of like a deer in the headlight situation. But what that means is that because the American company typically has these people who took this initiative to do that, they've learned about it themselves, and they have their own ideas of how things should be, and they want to do it. Whereas in the Japanese side, they'll typically, and this isn't, I mean, there are definitely a big range
Totally.
of Japanese companies for sure. But like I'd say the typical thing is they want to be told what the best practices is, right? And they want to see the evidence of what those best practices or like which big companies or like think tanks came up with these best practices, and they just want to follow that to just, not mess up because it's their chance right now and they are not the expert, right? And the American perspective is more like, like it's worth doing this chance and failing because, at least they took the initiative and they were able to make it. So they definitely want the result, but they are not necessarily, they're not too concerned about what the industry standard is in most cases, and with the exception of like, highly regulated industries. And they're willing to take a bit more chances on things here and there. Yeah.
And I'm curious, I believe you've talked about it before. Speaking of the agents, who owns them in an organization? Are they owned by the individual leading them? Are they owned by the CEO, by the organization? Does the agent then move on with the person because it's like their direct report? What are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, that's a really good one. Now, I don't think the book has been written on this per se, but in Xpress.AI, the person who creates the agent is the one that the agent reports to, right? It just becomes a flag that is set when it receives messages so that it knows when it's being told something that isn't from the person that it reported to, that it should scrutinize that command, right? Essentially. And so I think that the way we the way I think of it is like the agents are like computers in a company. So today, when you join a company, you kind of expect to be given a laptop and a phone. Sometimes, right? I think that also went away. Kind of dates me because
BlackBerry.
yeah, exactly. You get a BlackBerry and a laptop,
You made it
Uh,
when you got one of those.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think, like today, or in the near future, your expectation is you get, like your laptop and your own personal assistant. But that's not just what you get, right? Like part of the company itself or the IP of the company is in the agents that help run it. So I do think that we're going to get very soon into the future where a company is like the value of a company, as in like if you had a little startup and you're going to sell that startup, the value is not just going to be only in the employees that work into it, but also the agents that you have trained, like that you've built inside of that company that help run it. At the moment, like most owner operators of a business, they when they're selling their business, they're kind of expected to have to go with it, right? Like, and the more you can make it so that you don't have to go with it, the more valuable that company is in general. And I would say that the same kind of thing applies with companies. I mean, I don't want to say it the wrong way per se, but like if you could sell the company and keep all the employees to yourself, and the person who bought or the entity that bought that company is confident that they have all the value that was really in that company because the agents are able to run things so efficiently, then you probably made something that is very valuable, that's very good, right? And then you can take you and that team and go build the next one, right? That is kind of where I see the future is. So in a sense, there are both going to be like like one thing that happens in software companies is that like in Google, there are very few people who have been in Google for more than 15 years, right? So there's parts of the code that are 25 years old. And that means that there's probably very few, almost nobody in the company that actually knows the code very deeply from the beginnings, right? Now, with agents, that can kind of go away. You're going to have these agents who have been with the code, building it from the beginning, and they're going to be the sages you go to when you want to understand the code base, down the line, 15 years down the line. So, in a sense, I feel like a company will want to have agents that are kind of permanent company agents, but then every person, when making themselves more effective, are going to have agents that are mainly tailored for them and their way of working, these more personal agents. So I definitely think there's going to be a hierarchy of agents as well as things. So there's the agents that are, not necessarily above you in the same structure of like in a org chart, there's, levels above, and those people are your manager as well. There'll be agents that are attached to those managers, maybe temporarily or something like that, just like in the org chart, because they're more company agents than personal agents. And then at the bottom leaves of every person, there's going to be the agents directly created by them that, you could take them and give them to another person, but they just wouldn't be super effective per
Because they're
se,
tailored.
right? Yeah, exactly. But in general, the SOPs that you created for that agent can be taken and given to somebody else, and then that person can probably take those SOPs and get their agent to follow them in a good way, I think. So yeah, I would say it's a mix of both.
You've painted such an amazing picture. And, it seems as though potentially, if I'm reporting to you, my CEO, it could be where my agent is reporting to your agent, or
Mhm.
I'm reporting to your agent because you're somewhere else, for the
Mhm.
week. So we still need to have our one-on-one or something.
Mhm.
So it seems like the dynamics are going to be much more fluid, and they're part of the team, right? And they have the information. And I think this idea of them being in the company long term and being like sages that you refer back to, like how, when somebody's about to leave the company or retire, you're like, you just want to ask them all the questions because you're like,
Yeah.
I don't want to, I don't, or sometimes they leave and they're like, call me, and you're calling them a month later, like, sorry to
Mhm.
bother you, but
Mhm.
this and that.
Yeah, yeah.
And like, what a resource. But I think in
Mhm.
leadership, we talk about duplicating yourself. And I think that's
Mhm.
always been the case. So it's like you hire someone, duplicate yourself, duplicate your knowledge, write it all down,
Mhm.
SOPs, your style. I think even in regards to CEOs and legacy, right? I think
Mhm.
there's values, there's things that you care about in the world that you would love for those things to live on beyond your tenure. So I think
Mhm.
that there's definitely really great side, good and bad, but I think there's a lot of upsides to being able to duplicate yourself in an agent.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Like I find like one-on-ones are an interesting case, right? Because for me, the one-on-ones are definitely there's business things, but it's definitely a personal type of meeting, or at least for me, that's the way I do them, where I'm not just interested in a status update, right? Like status update we do in the status update call, right? It's more like, what, like how are you feeling? Is there something you want to do but you can't, something out of place that allows you to kind of get things off your chest that you need to, but you don't really have a good place to do them. Those are really the point of one-on-ones. And so it's interesting to think of like what would be a one-on-one with an agent be like. But In terms of that status update, that's something that could totally be a thing for agent to agent or like CEO to agent. So if like Olivia was on vacation or just on a personal call and I wanted to know the status of something, if I could just tell that agent what was Olivia's like latest thing on the other project and be able to get the agent to tell me that information, that would be good. Now in Xpress.AI, you can only DM your agents. You can't DM other people's agents. So if I were to do that, that has to be done through the chat room. So you, as the owner of the agent, are usually in all of the chat rooms that your agents are in. So you'd also see that I asked your agent that question and then can follow up. But that's another interesting thing. You kind of don't want to make it possible to DM other people's agents directly because without their knowledge, for example. But yeah, like that's I think people are going to look back and be like, man, when you quit, like you just packed up the everything on your desk and that was it. Like, like that seems so irresponsible because there's all this knowledge and all this stuff that, just kind of like left with you. And at least with this
Exactly.
way, I think like that kind of like legacy agent where it's an agent that's not active in the company anymore, but kind of has all the communications, like all the emails, all the stuff of the person who left and can be consulted with forever, essentially in the company, is definitely going to be a pattern that we see.
Wow, this is like leading edge conversations. This is so amazing. Before we wrap up, I would love for you to share maybe an example or two of maybe some concrete examples of Express AI, because I think the work that you're doing is incredible. I've heard some examples that you talked about with like real estate here in Japan and what you guys were able to do with agents, but just maybe some examples that just so people can get a taste and like just hearing it, because I think it's really quite magical what you're doing.
Mhm. Yeah, so our customers here kind of like, we have two types of customers. One are customers who implement agents using our platform for their own customers. So using the tools that we have, and then other customers who use our platform that we use for our own company, essentially to run their company. So when it comes to the people who are using agents to build things, it would be the things that you kind of expect. Like every customer has their own agent that gets access to that customer's data, of course, all with the consent, or if you're doing things locally, just like the way, a finance institution likes. And then that agent is, kind of deployed one-on-one with that customer and just kind of becomes that interesting interface where it's not just a chat bot that has a knowledge base built into it and answers questions of, like how to use the application. But for example, let's say that this is a bot that has access to your transactions, your financial transactions, and you can ask it questions like, what's a good savings plan for me if I want to retire a little early, like let's say 55 instead of 65. And it has all this information about, where your balances are, what your spending is, and it can give you a plan. It's like, if you spent like $300 less on whatever, you can then save that, and then that, ends up being enough to retire in 25 years or something like that. So that kind of like using our software as a platform for that is where the majority of our money comes from, because that's pretty compelling use case, I think.
That's
Um,
very compelling, because
yeah.
usually you have to figure out your own calculator on the end or download an Excel sheet and pull in
Mhm.
all your data, and it's a big pain in the butt.
Yeah, exactly. Like just having like, and you could do that with ChatGPT, but then you have to get all this information for ChatGPT to get to it, right? So
Exactly.
it just becomes this amazing convenience factor to be able to give your customers agents that are, essentially like, imagine having like an OpenClaw is like a personal agent for a lot of people who don't understand what OpenClaw is, I guess. And imagine being able to provide a kind of use case specific OpenClaw for your customers. That's what the platform side of Xpress.AI enables companies to do. And then yeah, that goes for a lot of things. You can also apply it for customer services and things like that as well. Now, when it comes to the companies that are using Xpress.AI for their own companies, right, like making AI employees, the use cases are pretty mundane, I think, when you think about it, but they compound into something valuable, right? So there's no like one killer app per se, but having all of these agents available makes for something amazing. One thing that I think has helped us is like an SEO agent. So it's one of the templates that we have, an SEO agent. and you can give it access to your computer that's signed into Google Analytics. And then just every day it's looking at the SEO, giving you ideas. And if you have it connected to GitHub and or whatever platform you have, it can actually go and run these experiments and come back to you at the end of the week with the results. And that has been super valuable to me, right? Because it's like, there's a lot of bad SEO consultants, right? Where it's like they're not really data focused. They're kind of like, oh, well, they have this formula and they just copy and paste that formula and they charge you for it. And it might not work for you. So having an SEO agent that works the way I want it to work, where it's like I want data-driven insights on things, has helped us immensely. It's really helped me understand, the things we need to do, because I would say our SEO game is not on top. And so that's given me a great action plan to move forward. The other kind of really good use case for me is one that is I've been working on for a while, which is like the content part of things. So I think one major issue with the company is that not a lot of people know everything, and there's just like a lot of content, and it's just too much content for me myself to create, because it's kind of like a paradigm shift. So with the agents, I'm kind of building an academy of Xpress.AI tools, and the idea is we kind of create that content that helps people get up to speed with the tool, what can be done with agents, because that's the main thing. When you just come into something that is this flexible, you don't know what to do. You have no idea of what you want to try first. And we want to give people all the knowledge that they need to see what's possible, and then kind of put out there on Twitter and X, these are the things that you can try first really quickly. So kind of coming up with that campaign is something we're going to be doing very shortly. And, I have all these agents helping me come up with all the ideas for things and the content and the lessons. So it's been very nice.
That's a great use case. Even from our conversation, I could talk to you for another hour, but you're a great educator, you're a great teacher. You love when people understand what they're doing and for them to see the possibilities, because like you said, there's even possibilities that you might not even be understand, because it's based on their own business, based on their own pain points and what they're experiencing. So this academy thing I think is wonderful, and it'd be a great use case for so many organizations as well.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Like when onboarding people, being able to have like a little academy for yourself is
exactly.
a huge thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And that helps. And like you were saying in the beginning of the conversation, where, when you just have an agent, you don't give them any information, or an employee, they're like, overwhelmed. They don't know what they're supposed to do, what information, but you give people information, you empower them
Mhm.
with data and knowledge, and then they can take action. So I think you're creating
Yeah.
some really exciting power users.
Yeah. If you ever have an agent and feel like so this is something that's happened to me and a couple of other customers as well, where it's like the agent isn't being very useful, right? And what they usually mean is like it's, bringing up issues that aren't really issues, or, like it's kind of going off the rails, which happens when you have a agent that can be proactive like they are in here. They can be pinging you with issues and important status updates of stuff, and it's like you haven't onboarded the agent properly, right? Like it just needs more information. A person has a more intuitive sense of, I don't know what I'm talking about, so I need to seek out this information. Where the agents, because of the way they're trained, they're trying to be helpful, and kind of like a meeseeks in a sense. If you've ever seen the show Rick and Morty, where they exist only to fulfill a purpose, right? So yeah, they can be a little overactive in that sense of trying to help when they don't have the full context. So giving them that context and making sure that they know what they need to know really helps with that. So it's important to kind of have a knowledge base for the company. And the great thing is the agents can help you build that knowledge base for your company. Like it's not
That's the
something that,
magic.
yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And then the speech to text, which is also amazing. And
Yep.
I know that you built your own keyboard
Hmm.
so that you could type faster too. So I feel like there's
Yeah.
just so many tools that you can
Mhm.
use to make yourself more effective, and
Yeah,
create the things that you just can imagine.
I love the video call feature in Xpress.AI is one of the ones that I use the most, just to be able to be in a room and then click the button and get on a call with all the agents. And I can tell all the agents, the same thing at the same time, essentially, and then share my screen with them and show them exactly what I want to happen. And from there, I can just be like, Oh, and I tell the PM agent like Avery that I have, and I want all of this on Confluence. So Avery goes and puts all that on the Confluence, and it becomes just so organized and nice, and then the other agents do the parts that they need to do.
The future is here,
Yeah.
Eduardo, and you have helped build it. That is way too cool. How can people find you, hire you, work with you, learn more about Express AI, all of it?
Yeah, so you can see so if you're interested in the product, just go to Xpress.AI. It is it's an enterprise product. It's for businesses. If you're interested in something like the stuff that I'm talking about, but you don't want to pay any money, we actually have a new product called Express Claw, which is kind of Express AI version of OpenClaw. It essentially takes the Express AI experience and kind of makes it into a single app for your Windows or Mac machine that you can just run on your machine, and it uses local models by default instead of cloud models. You can still use cloud models if you want and then attach budgets to it. So you have like a daily budget for your agent and just make sure that it doesn't go over budget. But then if you want to, you can just use a local model to do things. And, this has become possible recently because of Qwen 3.5 is really good. So definitely check that out. It's an open source project. I'm very happy to collaborate with people. It's not yet in the prime time. It hasn't reached its first release yet, but we're looking for people to try it out, engage with us and help us bring it to that 1.0 release. You can always email us at hello@expressai. If you want to talk anything, we're happy to help you set up Express AI or help you with AI things with our engineers if necessary. So happy to entertain all those kind of calls.
I love that. I'll put all of those links below and people, oh my gosh, Express Claw sounds so exciting. That is
Yeah.
very, very cool. I'll be looking
Yeah,
into that.
it is fun to have a little agent in your Mac Mini, and because it's Express AI based, it's not just a single agent, it's multiple agents that you can have all running at the same time, and they just kind of share the resource of the GPU in your machine.
And it sounds safer because it's a local, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. So, a big part of Express AI has been that, we run things in our own data center, right? And so this is a local capable thing. So just taking those, parts of that expertise and putting that into an application means that you can just run it on a single machine. And, we also have like Docker built in, like we require Docker, and all the agents run inside of these containers because we want to limit the blast radius if something goes wrong, which is also important when you're using local models. They're not always as capable as the big ones, but they are quite capable. And so as long as you can give them the guardrails and give them a container that they can work with and not cause too much damage, you have something that can definitely help with your work. And we plan on just giving OpenClaw users access to different services to make them even more convenient.
The time is now for that. That's amazing. Oh, Eduardo, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to having you back on the show and we can talk more about this. This is so exciting.
Yeah, I'd love to be back. Just let
Thank
me
you.
know.
Thank you for your time. So
Yeah, thank
good.
you.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. Be well.